Hey everybody, can you hear me? We hope you can. If you don't know, I'm reporter Blaze Lovell from Civil Beat. This is our Lieutenant Governor candidate, Sherry Menor-McNamara. Really hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? We've been having a little bit of technical difficulties this afternoon, but for those of you who stuck around with us, we're really glad you did. And thanks for joining us here at our third now Lieutenant Governor Get to Know Your Candidate event. For those of you who are new to Civil Beat, we're a local nonprofit news site dedicated to providing local investigative journalism. If you need to know more about the candidates, you can check out our elections guide at civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. Mahalo also to our event partner, Chaminade University, for hosting us in the Clarence T.C. Cheng conference room. Tonight we won't be taking any audience questions because we've gathered a lot of those ahead of time. We've only got a little bit to get to know Sherry, and so we're going to hop right into the questions. Sherry, first question. You got a lot of experience working with government, which we'll get into in a little bit, but could you point to a specific initiative that demonstrates you can work within government?
I've been with the Chamber of Commerce for 16 years. I started off in government affairs, and now my current role is presidency of the Chamber of Commerce. So I've been working with the legislature, as you mentioned, with administration, all levels. So it's all about relationships, I believe, and being able to listen, understand, and respect the decision, the different points of view. And so there's not one initiative per se, but it's more about how can we ensure that we're all listening and respecting each other.
As president of the chamber, you help the 2,000 member businesses there?
We have 2,000 plus members statewide, 80% small businesses from different industries.
That's a lot of different people, a lot of different business owners. How do you manage to balance all of those interests?
Yeah, you're right. It's a very diverse organization. Like I said, they come from different industries, different sized businesses. But again, it goes back to listening to our membership, asking them what their priorities are, what their concerns are, and then from there, shaping an agenda, policy agenda, to push forward. And there will be competing points of view at times, and that's when we take a position whether or not will it impact the collective good of our economy and our business community. If so, then we'll take a position. If not, we usually just monitor the bills.
You brought up the economy, and that's the first topic we're going to get to. You've advocated for small businesses as the president of the chamber. What would you do specifically to help them grow in Hawaii if you're elected?
Yeah, you're right. I've been representing small businesses. My mom owns a small business in Hilo, and she has had it for 40 years. And so I've seen her go through the challenges of running a business and the cost of doing business, how it continues to increase, and the sacrifices she had to make. And her story is not unique. There's so many thousands of businesses here. In fact, small businesses comprise 98% of overall businesses, and they contribute most of the jobs here. So for me, it's important to continue to support our small and local businesses. One is to, as Lieutenant Governor, I would like to work on an economic recovery plan to ensure that our small businesses, they can keep their doors open. And one of the major drivers of the cost of doing business is rules and regulations. So what I like to do is sort of copy what President Clinton did with his Reinventing Government initiative, and how he tasked Vice President Gore to work with the different agencies and identify those rules and regulations that are outdated or needs updating or just completely removed. And so that's one of the first initiatives I'd like to tackle upon discussing it with the governor, so that we can update the rules and regulations to the point where it is a balanced approach, more manageable, and it doesn't continue to hinder small businesses and their operations.
What do your members say now, your small business members that are part of the chamber? What are some of the challenges they've been saying that they face?
Oh, the current challenges, workforce shortage, supply chain, inflation, those are the top three drivers right now that many of our small businesses are facing. And they went through the pandemic for the past couple of years. Many of them had to shut down, and many were impacted by the restrictions. So for them, many of them are still climbing out of this deep hole that was dug. Many of them took out loans to keep their businesses going. Many of them used their savings to ensure that their employees could stay employed, and they did everything they could to ensure that they could keep the doors open. So again, even though our economy is, there's a lot of activity, there's so many that are still struggling right now.
What do you think government should do to help them?
Well, I think government should, again, going back to the rules and regulation, what are those, and addressing that. Two, I think if the legislature could create some kind of fund for small businesses so that in the event, we hope nothing happens again, or in some kind of pandemic or something, that there will be some kind of small business fund, whether it's commercial rent relief. And I know there is an initiative in the past couple of sessions to push that. Unfortunately, it didn't go through. But some kind of, emergency fund where small business could tap into. But other ways is to just go out there and listen to our small businesses. What are the needs and challenges right now? And during the pandemic, what the Chamber did is form a small business advisory council of industries that were most impacted by the restrictions, and to get their ideas and to have that kind of connection with government, for the governor and mayors and other legislators to hear them, what the concerns are. And many of them came up with some creative ideas. Some of them didn't go through, but it takes that kind of collective listening to come up with these solutions.
That small business recovery fund that you just mentioned, how could that be funded? Where would the money come from?
Well, similar to how the other funds have been created, right? The legislature has created different funds, the rainy day fund. So is that something, a portion of it can be allocated to small businesses? In what form, don't know, but that's at least bringing that discussion up, and then engaging small businesses, legislature, government, as well as the community to see what that looks like.
You mentioned, regulations, and there's been a lot of talk over the years about how, Hawaii is so unfriendly to business, how it's unfriendly to small businesses, and it's because of the government regulations we have in place here. That's been one of the arguments. What's, one or two regulations that, you'd like to tackle that you think make it hard to do business here?
I think this permitting is one of them. It is a county issue, but also, on a state level, what can we do to assist that? It's the time and the delays that it takes to get a permit. It does, every day that goes by, it does cost more, so looking at that. And all the different compliance issues per se, there's a lot of steps to take. Can we make it more efficient? And that's where, go back to reinventing government, looking at the rules and regulations. How can we make the system more efficient, but yet achieving what we need to do to ensure business comply?
Compliance things like environmental reviews and stormwater things, is it things like that?
Yeah,
the routine.
Exactly. And every business is, go through. Right, and every business is different in how the rules and regulations impact them, but that's where we need to go out and determine what those are.
Right. You've also talked about growing the workforce here, but you mentioned that Hawaii already has a lot of industries like healthcare, like energy, like technology, like agriculture. I'm curious, for these industries, how would you grow the workforces for those industries?
Yeah, I know we also have the impact on our visitor industry and the largest employer. So at the Chamber of Commerce, what we did is set up a hawaiiishiring.com, a one-stop center for those who were dislocated to help them find different types of jobs. Or those who decided, okay, I don't want to be in this industry, I want to work in the healthcare industry, because all these industries are hiring. In fact, during the pandemic, there are an average of over 25,000 jobs. But it's a matter of how do we rescale, upscale, and retrain those who are looking for these type of positions. So that's where we need to put in more investment, is education and workforce development initiatives and vocational training. And we can start from high schools, even middle schools for that matter, but high schools on work-based learning opportunities. So connecting our students early on to the different kind of industries that are out there and different types of jobs, so that they can start thinking, oh, okay, this is the kind of company I want to work for, whether it's the union, whether it's a business or nonprofit, but expose them early on. And then work with the schools to determine what kind of skill sets are necessary to train them for these types of jobs. And some schools have these academies, and that's a good way of doing it. So for example, the healthcare pathway. And one example that Hawaii Pacific Health, they have a program with Waipahu High School where high school students can get medical technician certificates. So they're working with HPH to get these certificates, and then once they graduate, if they do not want to go the university route, they'll go straight to the careers, and they can start at Hawaii Pacific Health at a good paying job, a good paying level, and then continue to work their way up. So we need more of that, is to create that pathway and prepare them for those skill set, and so that they can go directly to careers if they want. But it's, again, helping with the retraining, reskilling, upskilling. It's all about vocational training as we get this workforce to pivot to other types of jobs available.
Yeah, besides students, what about those people that are pivoting, that, they're in the middle of their careers and now all of a sudden they want to make a change, or they're forced to make a change? Where should the training be for them?
So there's community colleges that are available. Some businesses offer internships, so start from there. There's the job centers that provide that skill sets, training. So there's different resources out there, and if they go to hawaiiishiring.com, it'll list some of the places where they can get the retraining and obtain those skills. But again, going back to the high school students, it's going to be really critical as we move forward to strengthen our talent pipeline. And so connecting the business community, connecting unions, connecting the community with the schools, so that there's a seamless pathway as we move forward. And hopefully keep our keiki here too, right? And that's the main goal too.
Regarding agriculture, at the debates the other night, you mentioned, critical audits of the Agribusiness Development Corporation. They're the agency that was tasked with kind of overhauling a lot of the old sugarcane lands and making them, usable again for farmers. But that really hasn't happened according to the audits. If given the chance, how would you fix up the Agribusiness Development Corporation?
Well, as we saw, it was transferred to DBED, and I felt that while DBED does have its economic development mission, just to transfer it doesn't quite fix the problem. I felt that they need to fix the problem within the department.
Right.
And for me, it's to first identify what are the issues, what are the problems, talking with the farmers as well as talking with the government side, and identifying what those are and tackling them head on. So that's how I would approach that issue, rather than just transferring it to a different department.
Do you feel the legislature didn't go far enough in the changes made to the ADC? A lot of advocates said that that bill that did that was kind of watered down from before.
Well, I think we can understand the intent and trying to find a solution, but it was, I think, again, it's doing a deep dive in what those challenges are, and can we approach it head on that way.
Okay. Another thing from the... Sorry about that. At the debate on Tuesday, you also floated the idea of providing shipping subsidies for inter-island transportation. Young Brothers basically has a monopoly on, barging between the islands. Are you suggesting a subsidy for Young Brothers, possibly?
Well, that's up for discussion, but I think we need to do something, because the only mode of transportation is by air or by Young Brothers, right? And many of our small businesses, they can't fill a container load.
Right.
So what can we do to address that? Do we bring together different small business or farmers to use to fill up the container? But it's finding a solution, whether working with Young Brothers or working with government, and what those subsidies look like. That's up for discussion. I just floated up there because it is a huge challenge for many of our small businesses. In addition to farmers, our local manufacturing companies. So that's something I've been hearing over and over.
Yeah.
And so what can we do? What can government do to help that? As well as the private sector. What can we do collectively to address that challenge? Because we're so limited to the types of transportation.
Yeah, and like those small businesses you mentioned, they could really be burdened by the shipping costs.
Oh yes, that's one of a major cost driver as well.
On diversifying the economy, you've said you want to support innovation. What does that mean exactly? What does innovation mean to you?
Well, innovation can mean all kinds of things, but obviously technology is one area we really need to leverage. And how can technology help our existing industries? when we talk about diversifying the economy, I think sometimes we think, okay, what other new industries can we come up with? But we have industries here, from ag that we just talked about, to healthcare, construction, local manufacturing, technology. So how can we support those industries better, ensure that it's more interconnected? And I feel that technology can be one of those. So for example, tourism. How can tourism better connect with all the different existing industries here and make them more interconnected? And technology is one way to do that. So that's where I feel we can do a better job but with that said, we need to make sure we create a climate where these industries can thrive. And part of it is the cost of doing business.
Another question on the legislature, and this has to do with Red Hill. I understand that the chamber previously opposed bills that would have shuttered certain underground storage tanks, and this is of course before the fuel spills last year in 2017, and the fuel spills that happened last year, but the bills were from 2017 and 2018, as well as some others at the council. Could you explain the reasoning behind that? Why did the chamber oppose those measures that could have shuttered Red Hill earlier?
So if I could give a brief background about the Chamber's Military Affairs Council. So in 1985, the governor back then appointed this chamber to serve as the state liaison to the military, because as you know, the military is our second largest economic driver and the only state in the nation that has all the branches here in Hawaii. And so the mission of the Chamber's Military Affairs Council was protect, promote the military here, help them and help connect the military with the community to be a good steward of our communities. So that's the history. And when Senator Inouye passed on, we felt we needed to ensure that Congress realized that Hawaii still needs to be supported. And so that's why the Military Affairs Council was restructured. So it involves congressional liaisons, the CODELs and their liaisons, involves the state legislature, involves the county levels, the mayors, as well as community organizations, unions, as well as business organizations. And again, the mission was to help the military and be the liaison between the military and government and the communities. Now, the MAC makes its own decisions within that organization, but it is under the chamber umbrella. So based on what has happened, the legislation that was introduced, it was based on the facts that we got. And obviously, now that we're here, the military has to do everything they can to fix the problem, right? They've recognized it, they admitted it, and so now for the chamber is to help bridge the military and the communities, and for the military to do a better job in having that regular communication with the communities and transparency and accountability.
I mean, I'm curious, how has that changed, the relationship between the MAC and the community and the military? Was it, are things different now, and how, did they learn to navigate all that?
Yeah, it's rebuilding trust, right? Because what has happened is not acceptable to what happened to the communities and the families that got impacted. Now it's a much larger issue, the water issue. So it's just rebuilding trust with the communities. And how do we do that? And that's where we need to engage in dialogue and have more of these discussions to identify, okay, how can we move forward? Because we recognize that the military plays a role, but also the communities are of utmost importance, right? And the health and safety of our community is important. So now, how do we move forward? And that's where, again, we hope the Chamber's MAC can play a more pivotal role in bridging that and finding ways to move forward with productive and collective discussions.
Right. You mentioned relationships and community building, and that's a good segue into the next topic on relationships. And you've talked about wanting to partner with the governor to implement their plans and some of your own ideas. How would you do that? I mean, in your ideal world, if you were elected, what would you like the governor have you do?
Yeah, so my leadership style has always been about collaboration, partnerships, and listening. And so for me, I believe the lieutenant governor needs to respect the governor's position because it's the right thing to do, and it's for the people. So I feel lieutenant governor is more about how can I complement the governor the best? How can I ensure that the governor will be successful in pushing an agenda that will benefit all the people? And so for me, it's more about meeting with the governor on day one, or even before that, and asking him or her, how does he or she see the lieutenant governor supporting the governor? Because we need to have that agreement first to move forward, right? And how can I best help? So that's one, I want to listen to the governor first. But two, as I mentioned earlier about the economic recovery plan, having a discussion with the governor to see if that's something I could lead, just because I can bring that economic and business perspective into the conversation and through my relationships with the communities and government on all levels, so that we can come up with a more comprehensive agenda. And then being that liaison between the communities and government. And I'm the only candidate from the neighbor islands, and so I feel it's really important to go out there into the communities, go to the neighbor islands, listen, and bring back that information on the potential solutions and thoughts back to the governor, as well as the legislature, working with the legislature and seeing what we can do to come up with, again, a more comprehensive agenda to move our state forward.
Is there any candidate in particular you'd want to work with?
That's one of the most asked questions. And so I have worked with all three, Josh Green and Kai Kahele, through my job at the chamber and when they were at the legislature. So Josh Green comes from the medical background. Kai Kahele comes from military, as well as he's a pilot, and both are legislators. So for me, I could, again, how can I best complement the governors? For me, I can bring that economic and business perspective into the conversation and the relationships that I built beyond, outside the legislature, but within the communities. And with Vicky Cayetano, yes, she is small business, and small business who I represent, but she doesn't have that legislative experience, whereas I bring 16 years of navigating the legislative process, building those relationships with legislators, and working with department. So having that expertise, or experience rather, and complementing Vicky Cayetano. So I bring that because I feel the lieutenant governor is one who can best complement the governor's skill sets and ensure that all perspectives are in the discussion when we come up with solutions.
If you were the LG for the last 4 years, is there anything you would have done differently?
For me, I think it goes back to, so based on my experience in the past couple of years in working with the small businesses, one of the, I felt could have done better, and if I were LG, is to be more connected with the communities and communicate more with the communities, engaging them. For example, the small businesses, when they went through the shutdown, it was a matter of days before they found out. And a lot of time for small businesses, they need some advance notice, especially for restaurants, because they have all these goods and refrigerated goods, and they need to know when, what they need to do, as well as when we reopen. They need time to ramp up, as well as get their employees back. And so it takes time, but we were not engaged in the process in finding out, okay, this is what it takes to reopen, or this is what it takes to shut down, and what that looks like. It was just boom, okay. And then a lot of our businesses they just didn't know what to do. And it was hard to get information. And so as Lieutenant Governor, if I were Lieutenant Governor, I would have done that, is to be that liaison, go out there, find out what's needed, and what's their thought process, meaning businesses, as well as the communities too.
Do you think how the governor and the lieutenant governor handled the pandemic, do you think they handled it okay?
Well, no one had a playbook for this, obviously, right? I think it's the health and safety of our people were the utmost importance, and it was just so hard to understand where we were going to go. Right. The whole world didn't know, right? But I think after the first shutdown, perhaps we could have done a more effective job in terms of what that path looks like. So for example, through the Small Business Advisory Council, committee, we came up with this program. It was called a program where if small businesses did these certain things, then they could keep their doors open. So just having more of those type of conversations, finding more creative solutions so that it wasn't another shutdown. So that's where I think it could have been better. But again, overall, we didn't know, and I think I'm sure it frustrated many because open, close, and all these restrictions. But we know the intent of the governor was with the health and safety, so we have to respect that. But I feel that we could have done better in communication, engaging more to see how we could have moved forward after the first shutdown.
Switch gears just a little bit to tourism. You've said you want to see a more sustainable model of destination management. What exactly would you like to see from the tourism industry?
Right. It's been a topic even before the pandemic about over-tourism. And so the Hawaii Tourism Authority did pivot and now focusing how do we manage tourism better. And so through the destination management action plans, that's definitely, I feel, a positive first step. And what's great about that is that it engaged the community. So the committee comprised of not only tourism officials or those in the industry, but also small businesses, community leaders, residents of the community. So it was a collective discussion as to what they would like to see within their community accomplished. And that's where some came up about the fees for different parks, right? And each island has one. So it reflects the needs and the wants and the thoughts of the community. So that's where I believe that this plan has to continue to move forward. But we want to make sure that it's not a plan that will go back on the shelves, but to move forward and checking off what those action items are.
The state's talked about for a few years now, trying to get less tourists here, but the ones we do get, make sure they spend more. How do you think that could be accomplished?
Well, part of it is how you market too. But I think one area that has potential is businesses and conferences and conventions. That's something we need to bring back through the pandemic. That's a large source of revenue that we lost, and that's where a lot of the quality spenders come to Hawaii through conferences and conventions. So if we can start attracting more of that, but we also need to rehabilitate the convention center too. Unfortunately, it didn't get as much funding as we hoped it would have, but at least we have some. We start from there, right? But I think if we can market more of that target market, then we can bring in more revenue and different types of spenders as well.
Even if the convention center, is under, how do I put it, underfunded? How would you market then to that business crowd and that convention and for convention travel?
Well, that's where, as Lieutenant Governor, I would talk with the industry, the hotels, the convention center, and see how we can market more effectively to this market, targeted market. And yeah, I think because of our limited resources and where the convention stands now, how can we be more creative in doing that? And there are ways, I'm sure, but that's the discussion that we need to start having in terms of attracting more of those types. But there's a lot of surveys being done, studies to see how do we attract. Malama campaign is one of them, mindful visitor. So it's not just one type of ideas, different ideas, but we need to continue to pursue them and adjust accordingly so that we continue to find these mindful travelers coming to Hawaii that will also spend.
Mm-hmm. You've worked, around the legislature for a number of years, but you've also worked at other levels of government. If I'm not mistaken, you interned in the White House, right?
I did.
During the Clinton administration.
Yes, I did.
Could you talk more about that? What was that like?
Yeah, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Spent the summer there, and you just, if you go to DC, you just feel the politics. But being in the White House takes it to a whole new level. I worked in the department where they appointed personnel. So for me, it was more going through the resumes, sifting through them, making recommendations in a memo and giving it to my supervisor. But it's just a great experience for any college student. Maybe not Office of the President, but whether it's on the Hill or a nonprofit in DC, you just learn so much about the process, and it's a completely different environment from Hawaii, obviously, but it just exposes you to what government is like and what you do. But I made a lot of friends there but yeah, it's hard to describe, but it's a wonderful fascinating experience. But yeah, before, yeah.
Yeah. Was it hard, going from a neighbor island, you went to college in Los Angeles, but then having to go all the way to the East Coast? Was that different?
It was, but my mom always taught us to be independent, open-minded, explore. So with that mindset, I said just go for it, and that's why I never hesitated to pursue these opportunities. So living in DC, New York, London, Tokyo, she always said, just gotta explore while you can, and always learn something from it. So it wasn't really difficult. Yeah, I missed my hometown of Hilo, and with the pace there, how it is, but also just being curious to see what other places are like. So it wasn't a huge adjustment, just because, again, what my mom taught me.
Then so you've spent a lot of time around politics and politicians. There's two questions a lot of new legislators need to answer, and someone told me this, and so I was going to ask you to. What's one proposal you would try to do anything you could to get passed or implemented?
As Lieutenant Governor?
In general, I guess.
Oh, in general? Oh, wow. Well, I guess for me, I don't think it's the Lieutenant Governor that should come up. Well, let's just say I would want to hear what the constituents would like to be done immediately, because that's a role that LG, I believe, should play. As well as consult with the governor. What is the top priority the governor wants to push? And work with the legislature in navigating that process. And I feel that needs to be done way early, not when session starts, not a month before, but start having the conversations with governor, the legislature, as well as the communities, and see what the top priorities are. And for Lieutenant Governor to help facilitate that.
What's something you'd never want to see get passed in the legislature?
Oh, I don't have any right now, because I think we need to keep an open mind, right? As Lieutenant Governor, now it will be the voice of the people that I would advocate, compared to right now I work for the chamber. I am a small business advocate. My members tell me what to do, and I have a board that I report to. So it's about how can I advocate for small business, keep the doors open, how can we get employees stay employed, and working with the families. But as Lieutenant Governor, now it's the voice of the people that we need to advocate for.
You talked earlier about going through the islands in this election season and hearing from people and hearing from farmers also. I was curious, what have you been hearing from farmers? What are some of the problems that they're telling you about?
Well, they feel that they haven't government has been talking about sustainability, being more resilient, food security, supporting more local, but they just feel that government has not done enough to help the small local farmers. And so that's where I think we can do more to help them. And part of it is technical training too. How can we provide more technical assistance so these farms can continue to operate, because they're so hands-on and in the field? But how can the government help them with the operations side so that they can be more sustainable? Subsidies, looking at that. Creating more programs. There is a program called The Bucks, which provides cards to EBT recipients so that they can buy more local and healthy foods. So that supports them, but it also helps farmers. That wasn't funded this year, but it's things like that. But in addition to ag, we have the fishermen. We also have hunters, and I've heard from hunters, and they felt that their voices are not as heard, and that there's so much they can do to contribute to sustainability. And I know there's a bill that was passed this year, as well as signed by the governor, that recognizes gaming, hunting as part of the sustainability plan. So we need to engage more of them, because there are a lot of wild pigs out there, right? And so we can use that as a source of food and for our local people. But I heard that they have been going through challenges as to where to farm, all the restrictions. But how can we look in a broader lens so that they are a part of the picture too?
I'm really interested in that. How could you make hunters and hunting a bigger part of the agricultural industry?
Yeah, that's, again, it's more about finding out what those roadblocks are, what the challenges are, and now considering hunters as part of the whole sustainability. And again, I don't think we've provided enough attention in terms of what their needs are and how they fit to this overall. But now, because of this bill that was passed, it's at least the first step to recognizing gaming or hunting as part of the ecosystem and being part of the sustainability plan. So that's part of the whole picture. And ag farms are part of that, but hunting and fishing as well.
A little bit earlier, you mentioned subsidies for some small farmers. What should be subsidized? What kind of assistance are they looking for?
Whether if it's on state land, what we can do to help to offset some of the costs from that. But again, it's part engaging the farmers. What more can we do to support them? And creating programs such as the Bucks, as well as the food hubs, is one initiative too that can help the local farms. How can we invest more in that? Because a lot of times local farms don't produce at the magnitude of the big farms. So similar to when I talked about the shipping, the less than container load, a lot of them can't fill one container. So shipping subsidies is another component of that, of how we can support ag so that they can ship to the neighbor islands.
What else do you think could be done to support local farmers? A lot of people have talked about, they need better infrastructure, they need better this, but what else do you think could be done for them?
I'm sure there's a lot that we can do for them, right? Their rent, technical assistance, as well as creating more support local initiatives. Also more government utilizing local farm products in the system. Farm to school is one, right? But I think there can do more. As well as the private sector, how can they do more in helping our local farms? I talk about the tourism industry. How can they support more of the other industries? And that includes ag. So how can they use some of the local products in their hotels or within conventions, or just sourcing more of that? So it's not only government, but it's also the private sector. And so how can we do this in a more collective and comprehensive way?
Another idea you brought up at one of the debates had to do with housing, and you suggested using some vacant commercial properties or office space and convert that into housing units. I thought that was an interesting idea. What do you think that would look like?
Yeah, because space is very limited, right?
Yeah.
And we need to start being more creative. And urban sprawl is not an option, or a very limited option. We don't want urban sprawl. So we need to start thinking, how do we go up? And I brought that up because, as we know, pandemic has led many businesses to work from home, and that has led to some vacancies. So how can we now reimagine what that looks like? 1132 was a commercial building. It turned into affordable rentals, but with other types of buildings. Perhaps put childcare or daycares at the bottom, and then have workforce housing at the top. So, and same with schools. How can we repurpose schools? We've been building schools like we've been in decades ago, the same classrooms. But how can we now look, as we look ahead, what that schools look like in a more collaborative environment, and having teacher housing be part of that complex, having businesses as part of that complex, but making it more of a multi-purpose type of complex so that it addresses multiple challenges. So health, childcare, workforce housing, small businesses that will support those type of services. So the whole point there is just we need to start thinking more creatively and innovative as we face these huge and looming challenges and limited space.
That idea for having teacher housing on public school campuses, that's been floated at the legislature before, but it hasn't really, gotten through. How would you approach the legislature differently to try to make that idea successful?
Right, so they have been 21st century schools, and I know if they've passed legislation to initiate that, and in fact, the governor now has a school facilities authority executive director, Keone Farias, who's also from Hilo. And so, he's tasked to come up with this type of facility or housing. And so I think that's something that we need to continue to support in making it happen. And they chose him because what he's done when the hurricane hit on the Big Island, and he put up this temporary housing tent. So he was action-oriented, but we want to make sure that he's supported, or the facility, this new position is supported, so that that person can make sure the plans that were in place come to fruition. Because the legislature did pass legislation, I can't remember which bills, but to create this 21st century schools type of concept. And there's other states and cities that do it. Robert Kennedy School, I think it's in Los Angeles. They have that kind of a motto. And so it's how do we bring that here, but making it ensure that it works in Hawaii.
In Los Angeles, you said, Robert Kennedy?
Yes.
What does it look like there? I mean, are there literal apartments on campus, or are they living in like those portables that we have here? What does it look like over there?
They put down, I'm sorry I can't recall right now, but I can look back.
Yeah.
But I know it created a more collaborative environment for students. And then it was more multi-purpose facility. I think there was housing too. I'll go back and check. But the whole thing about that is just thinking in a more creative way and just doing it different.
Switching gears a little bit to the environment, there's a couple environmental questions I had for you, but the first thing I really wanted to address was our infrastructure, because we're likely going to be inundated by sea level rise just because of what's happening, elsewhere, and policies happening elsewhere. I mean, looking at downtown and Waikiki, our business center and our tourism center, what needs to be done there to prepare for rising seas?
Well, that's a huge challenge, right? It's not only Hawaii that's facing that. There's many cities that are also facing that too. And one of it is collective personal responsibility, and start really doing our part in changing our behavior and to address climate change and all these environmental challenges that are rapidly surfacing, so to speak. But we also need to look at policies as to how can we slow down that process, right? I mean, slow down the inevitable based on the data we have. But also technology. I think there's a huge opportunity there to incorporate technology. And what that looks like, I don't know, but we have Elemental Accelerator and we have Blue Startups. How can we tap into them to start thinking about what kind of technology can they come up with to help mitigate some of the impending challenges that Hawaii will face. So technology is a huge area that we need to start investing more and tap into.
But I mean, what do you think needs to happen to protect, the downtown area or the Waikiki area from those rising seas?
Again, I go back to looking at discussing with planners, discussing with those in the industry, engineers, what we need to do, environmental groups, what needs to be done. And as Lieutenant Governor, I want to be that convener to, okay, let's attack this now, kind of thing. What do we need to do 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What does that plan look like? I don't have an easy solution to that,
right,
but it's more about tapping into the experts, finding out what can be done immediately, medium term, long term, and also, again, doing our part as citizens. And I bring up technology again because that is part of the picture, and it's happening elsewhere. They are tapping technology, and for example, I know some places they're using, it's called these greens they put into oceans, it absorbs the water, not into ocean, absorb water, but not into ocean, but on land. And when rain comes, it absorbs it so that it slows down the floods. But just different types of technology that we can leverage, and tapping into that, doing more research as to what other places are doing too, and how we can bring that to Hawaii so that it addresses the problem.
Do you think buildings should, stop at a certain point in areas that could be inundated by sea level rise? Repeat that question. Do you think construction and building should stop in areas, that could be inundated by sea level rise in the next few decades?
Well, that's something we need to analyze, right? Because of course, we don't want to build something and knowing that it is going to take over the building, but perhaps you can build higher with higher stakes, so it's, it doesn't, we don't build from ground up, but have these pillars or stakes or whatever it is to so that it goes through. But that's something I don't have the expertise. So, but definitely as LG, want to ensure that I can help get that information convened, come up with a comprehensive plan.
And then, homes on the North Shore and areas on Maui, we can see the water sometimes going up over the road at times when there's high tides. In those areas, what do you think needs to happen? Does the road need to move inland? And then how do you balance that against, these property owners, these homeowners whose homes would need to move if the road were to move? How do you balance that situation?
Well, moving the roads inland right now, that'll be kind of hard. It'll take a long time. But that could be probably a long-term solution, and start looking at that now. But in terms of the immediate solution and solving that problem, how can we assist those homeowners? But at the same time, it's the homeowner's responsibility too, because if they knew that they were buying into something that would inevitably be in this situation, but feel that government also, how can they support these homeowners in those areas to mitigate the damage? So in that one case in North Shore, being rapid responsible, right? How can government go out there and SLG go out there and see what needs to be done, talk with the counties, talk with the state, talking with the associated departments, as well as the private sector homeowners to see what are the solutions to address that immediately. But it's a larger impending issue too, right? This is just, I'm sure, one of many that could potentially happen. So how can we prevent that? And that's what we need to look at.
Right. Moving on to another topic, you mentioned earlier that your mother owned a small business in Hilo, right? What kind of business was it?
It's a travel agency. Yeah, so past couple of years, obviously, travel industry stopped, right? And her business evolved over time. Technology definitely impacted her business. And so she had to pivot her model of what her business would look like. So for her, she focused on Japan tours and cruises. And of course, those are two industries that are impacted, continue to be impacted. So it's been really tough. Went from several bookings a day to 0 bookings. That's an overnight change. But that's my mom's story, but there's so many other similar stories there that are small business space. And we've seen some of them shut down, like most recently Dean's Drive-In, Henry Louis, that's been institution. And we don't want any more, but unfortunately that may be the case because of not only the pandemic and what they're coming out of, but the supply chain issue, prices continue to go up, and just there's so many challenges. And so just feel, whatever we can do from the private sector, helping support our local businesses as well as government, how can we make it less challenging as well?
And she was running a business from the time you're growing up, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And she would put us to task too. We had to organize all these brochures, make it all nice, and since we were little kids.
Is there any memories that stand out in particular for you, watching your mom try to run her own business while raising kids?
Oh, wow. Yeah, she kind of feels bad about this, but so when we lived, she's just working so hard. She moved from Japan. I mentioned this before in other conversations, but moved to Japan with no money, no friends, and couldn't even speak the language. And she came to Hawaii. Somehow she managed to start her own business, and 40 years later, she still has it. But growing up, I've seen how much she had to put into it, and many hours. And doing everything she could to keep her kids in school and extracurricular activities and sending them away for colleges. And there are times where a lot of owners too, they don't get a paycheck, right? Because they need to make sure they cover expenses. And I remember there were times where she didn't have money, but she somehow managed to just continue to move forward. But yeah, I remember eating a lot of pizzas, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, and back in the day as kids, we were like, oh yeah, but my mom feels so bad because she didn't have time to cook meals for us. Fortunately, my grandma from Japan would stay with us. So Japanese is kind of my first language when I was growing up, because my grandma couldn't speak Japanese, and so she would make us some food, but she could only stay 1 or 2 months out of the year. But yeah, it's just when I bring that up, my mom gets so emotional. She goes, "Oh, I feel so bad. Because to do this, couldn't spend time making food, blah blah blah." But it's this part of the sacrifices of running a small business. But I said, "Mom, no worry. We love the Pizza Hut." Yeah.
Do you think growing up with a mom who's a small business owner, do you think that impacted or informed your decisions today?
To run or?
No, just in general in your career and life.
Yeah. I've had a very windy career path. So I went away after graduating in Hilo, moved to the continent, went to college there. Just stayed there for 8 years, in Japan for 2 years, because I quite frankly didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. So I had all these different types of jobs. They're great jobs, but but it wasn't until I came back, then I went back to school. So I got my JD, MBA degrees at University of Hawaii. And during that time I worked with the legislature, and I saw how much policies could impact people. And that's where I felt that connection and something I wanted to do. So once I graduated from law school, I knew I didn't want to practice law, but I wanted to do something in government. And so I had to work in the private sector because I had to pay off student loans. And that time I sent my resumes to all these different law firms, and only one wrote back, but she said, "I don't have any jobs, so I just want to learn about your background." So we met over coffee, and then a week later she said there was a job at the chamber opening up. I had no idea what the chamber was at all. No idea. But looked it up, and I saw the mission was to advocate for small businesses. And so that's when I felt the connection, because I just automatically connected because of my mom having a small business, and Hawaii being such a small business community and how they make up the fabric of our communities. So that's why I decided to work at the chamber, and 16 years later, I'm still there, but hopefully not in a few months. I don't know, because I don't want to, because I love my team there, and there's so much important work to do, but I just felt as Lieutenant Governor, I could have a broader impact for a broader community and for the people.
Mm-hmm. Do you think coming from a neighbor island gives you a different perspective on statewide issues?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think we can say policies are Honolulu Oahu-centric. It's one thing to say it, but to actually grow up and live it and feel that we're disconnected is a whole different language and a whole different perspective. And I am truly grateful that I grew up in Hilo. And I recognize, and especially now, as been traveling across the islands, that's always the common theme. Well, everything's so Honolulu-centric. What about us, kind of thing? Because they just feel they don't get the type of equal resources as Honolulu. Mm-hmm. So that's where, as Lieutenant Governor, I want to make sure not staying stuck on the 5th floor and taking calls, but more going out there into the communities and listening to them, whether it's town halls, but just a regular schedule of meetings and going out there and listening to them, especially in neighbor islands.
We're coming up on time, and so I ended every interview with a sports question, so I'm going to ask you a sports question too. I saw that you played tennis in high school.
Yes.
Can you recall your hardest match?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a long time ago, Blaze. I can't remember that long ago. I can't. Gosh, I can't remember what the hardest match. I think every match is hard. Every match is hard because you're always going up with different competition. Doubles is always hard too, because don't want to disappoint your doubles player, but it's a lot of teamwork, and so I think doubles is always the hardest matches. But there's no one that truly stands out. I always took each match as the hardest match. But those were the days, but now it's pickleball.
It's sweeping the islands. And you mentioned before we started, you've been running marathons.
Yeah.
What's the roughest race you recall?
Oh my goodness. I ran 5 marathons, 3 in LA and 2 here. Actually, there's a couple that were really tough. One in LA, I wouldn't say the marathon itself was tough, but I forgot where I parked my car. I didn't know, and I went by myself, and it was pouring rain. It took me another hour to find my car. So I would like to say I'm the only person that ran 27 miles instead of 26.2. But the toughest one was 10 years ago, the Honolulu Marathon for sure. I trained for it. 8th mile, my knee was in pain. I mean, it was the sharpest pain I ever felt in my life. But I called my husband and I said, hey, my knee is sore. I mean, I can't walk. And he goes, do you want me to pick you up? I said, no, I'm going to do this. Stubborn me. So I kept pushing forward, and this guy behind me, he saw I was struggling, so he gave me this Japanese version of Bengay. So I rubbed it on my knee. I think too much because my knee was on fire, but I didn't feel the pain, so I kept going and going and going, and all of a sudden it dissipated, so the pain came back. But it was torture, but somehow, it's a mindset. And we talked about it earlier. The last mile in is the most painful, obviously the pain, physical pain, but it's the mental pain of reaching that end. And that's what I feel like with this campaign right now. It's the last mile in, and it's a mindset. So, but it seems like the finish lines keeps getting farther and farther. Be there.
Right, we're about a month out from the primary election, but thank you, Sherry, for sitting down with us today for the discussion. Really appreciate it. There's one more candidate in this Know Your Candidate LG series. We've got Keith Amamiya at 6 p.m. Monday. We'll also be hosting Know Your Candidate events for the congressional races for CD1 and CD2. You can register for those at civilbeat.org/events. And again, check out our elections guide at civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections for all of our elections coverage and more info on these candidates. Thank you again to our supporters at Chaminade University, and to everybody watching online, good night, and thanks for joining us.
Good night. Thanks.